I'm Nathalie Mezza-García, and welcome to the Floating Cities Show. Here, you'll learn about the latest floating projects, developments, houses, buildings, neighborhoods, floating city plans, and the regulations, zones, and jurisdictions that enable them all across the world. You'll hear directly from the makers, the architects, designers, developers, engineers, and even the regulators that make floating projects possible. Come join me while together with Sofia, we help you navigate the complexity of these new waters. Okay, so Marshall, you are in the Danish winter right now. How's that going?
It's hard. I'm not used to it, despite having lived here for 8 years now. You would think you would get used to it, but this time of year in particular, it starts to get really cold and really wet and really dark, and I pine for Australia, where I come from.
Why did you move to Denmark?
So I studied here. I did my master's at the architecture school in Copenhagen, and I fell in love with the city of Copenhagen and have never really left.
Oh, I love the colors.
The colors of the buildings.
Yeah, not the colors of the winter, the colors of the buildings.
Yeah. They are nice. Yeah, I live in an old, I think it's around 300 years old, this sort of light orange rendered traditional shell. So that's, I think, one of the things you're thinking of, one of the houses you're thinking of.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the typical houses that you see, one besides the other, different colors. Beautiful.
All slightly wonky after a few hundred years of settling into the ground.
Yeah.
My living room floor is maybe 20 centimeters high on one side, which makes it a little like a boat when you're living in it. But
do you also wake up feeling a bit dizzy?
Yeah, you do actually, yeah.
But thankfully, you have really cool work to look forward to in your normal life.
Yeah, so it is nice, I think. It's exciting, some of the projects we're doing, and we're focusing now more on maritime architecture. So I've previously worked for 4 years doing regular land architecture, I suppose, doing houses mainly, and now I'm moving along with Magnus Marbio, my co-founder at Mast, into doing purely maritime architecture, which is exciting.
It's super exciting. And how did the shift happen? Because the first project that at least I was familiar with from Maritime Architecture Studio is what everybody in the world, well, a huge portion of the world with internet access has seen, and it's the floating islands. So how did that happen?
Yeah, maybe I can tell you from the start. It was a small side project. As I mentioned, I was working designing houses around Denmark as my main focus, doing villa houses and summer houses. But I'd always been interested in building on water. Actually, Magnus Marbio, my partner at Mast, we met at architecture school and we both lived on the water. So Magnus grew up on an old 100-year-old timber sailing ship with his family, which he sailed back and forth to America.
Nice.
6 times. And he had lived in the harbor on this boat for quite a few years. And when I first arrived in Denmark, I got a small scholarship to study there, and rather than spending it on tuition fees, which I probably should have, I used it all to buy a houseboat.
No.
So
where did you get the money for your tuition?
I worked while I was studying.
Okay.
I had no rent to pay since I was living for free on a houseboat from that point. So it worked out in the end.
Okay.
So we both had this experience living on the harbor and seeing it change, and both became really interested in the way that the harbor was changing, and wanted to be involved in that. We could see that there was an enormous opportunity to take advantage, or well, not to take advantage of, but to
in a good way.
Create something. Well, yeah, to create a new way of experiencing and using the harbour, since the original reasons for having the harbour are slowly disappearing.
Yeah.
So we had this idea that we would do a small project together, just as a side project, while we were working on other things. And that was the first Copenhagen island, which we built in one very cold summer, in a boat where I'm sitting right now.
Oh.
So we got a small grant from the Danish Arts Foundation, Statens Kunstfond, which allowed us to buy the materials, but nothing else. And then we just set about building it and making it up as we went along, to make this small prototype to test the idea of building with timber on water. And yeah, everything sort of followed after that, I guess. Wow.
And why did you choose timber in particular?
At that point, it was very pragmatic reasons. We could afford to buy timber with the small amount of money we had. And Almas and myself are both familiar with working with timber.
Okay.
So I've done a little bit of carpentry in the past. I'm not a qualified carpenter by any means. But we both had a little bit of experience with this traditional sort of woodworking. And we wanted to use some of the traditional boat building techniques in making this sort of platform, this Copenhagen Island #1.
Interesting. So maybe that's why you see the different, like the texture, one besides the other. Is that why? Or what traditional boat building techniques you used?
Well, yeah, it is. It was more or less constructed using a massive timber frame, in a similar way to traditional sort of piers and bridges, using these big pieces of Douglas fir. And then around that, we sort of wrapped it in cladding, which was sort of the most pragmatic way we could, affordable way we could build it.
It works. And for the flotation aspect, how did you ensure that you would float? If it was your first project, do you have any, or I'm sure that you must have any fun experiences of the first time that you went on not on the prototype, but on the real big built thing, and you say, okay, I'm gonna go there. So how was that process of getting it off the water?
Yeah, so I mean, on the projects we're working on now, we work closely with a maritime engineer who actually sits in the opposite office. Obviously, that's a really important part of the projects. But for this first one, since it was on such a tight budget and it was a side project, we just winged it, basically. It was purely intuition. Wow. And a lot of people, actually, while I was building it, a lot of these old sailors and architects would walk past and point at it and look skeptically at me while I was screwing on timber. And a lot of people thought it wasn't going to work. But we craned it into the water, and it was totally fine. We had to even it out using ballast, which was always part of the plan. But yeah, it's a pretty simple thing to work out if something is going to float. It's not complicated at all. It's about displacing enough water to support the weight of the structure. So,
and yeah, that simplicity, I see that it's also extrapolated to other aspects of the project, like the clean design, but also the simple functionality that despite its simplicity and that it's a small scale, simple project, the transformations or what it creates are huge, are really beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah, that was part of the plan for this first prototype. We wanted to create something as simple as possible, almost a symbol. We were inspired by this sort of small emoji that everyone knows of a sort of small desert island with a single palm tree.
Yes.
I think everyone has this feeling. It's a sort of whimsical symbol that everybody is aware of, and we wanted to sort of create that. So we wanted to strip away as much detail as possible and just have this tree and this little 20 square meter island and almost nothing else, and then detail it in a nice way.
Interesting, interesting. So, but now there's more than one, right?
So the project started with this prototype around 3 years ago. We launched it actually without any permission. Again, we could foresee that it was going to be a really complicated thing to get permission for, and we thought it's better just to do it and then to ask for forgiveness afterwards, you know. So we dragged it out one morning with a little tugboat into the harbor and left it there and stood back and watched, and people liked it. And thankfully also the municipality and the harbor authority thought it was interesting and could see the benefit of it. So after a bit of negotiation, we got them on board, and now they're both supporting the project, and they've actually contributed money to develop the project. So we're in the process at the moment of building some more permanent versions of the islands.
Okay.
Will be made from steel, and will be more. They'll have more permanent vegetation as well. There'll be multiple trees on each island, and they'll be covered in grass and bushes, in order to try and bring some more wilderness into the city center. So there'll be 3 built next year, and then hopefully more the following year.
Wow, congratulations, really. And what tend to be the responses of people when they talk to you about people who have been there, who've sat down, who've maybe lied down? What do they tend to tell you about the experience?
I think we got mostly positive feedback. We put it very purposefully in an area in the north of Copenhagen called Nordhavn's Basin, which is an area that's being developed at the moment. So it's old, an old area for shipping. There's a lot of derelict buildings, and it's slowly being gentrified. So nothing was happening there, and we thought this was a good place to put it. Also to sort of kickstart the sort of occupation of the harbor, and to give people a reason to visit it. And we saw that a lot of people with kayaks and stand-up paddleboards and small boats would start to visit it, and also people swimming from the shore. Yeah, and it was funny. We saw a lot of people use it in different ways. Lots of people having picnics out on the prototype, and yeah, it was really nice. It was just a curious little object which people found interesting, and which sort of brought a little bit of life and whimsy into this otherwise fairly boring area of development.
Don't be surprised if you also see a marriage proposal there, because it's a beautiful spot, and it's so.
That's funny you mention that, actually, because we've had multiple people emailing us asking if they can visit once these islands are built. We've had lots and lots of strange inquiries since it got a lot of publicity around the world. We've had people. We had a death metal band contact us asking if they could film a film clip there.
Cool.
Asking to get married there. We've also had events like the Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras be interested in renting them and using them for future events.
Wow.
So there's a lot of people who can see that it would be a funny place to do something like that. And we've also talked ourselves about hosting small events on the island, for example, talks or small musical performances.
Oh, nice. And with the new ones that are being developed with the city, what is the legal category of the islands? Because they are, what are they, legally speaking?
It's very gray. It's always difficult with doing something which doesn't fall into a clear category. So in some senses, they're considered ships. We need to follow a lot of the rules that ships will follow. They need to have permanent navigation lights, for example, fixed to them, so that other small boats don't run into them in the middle of the night.
Okay.
They need to also follow some of the safety requirements of ships. Uh,
Okay.
but in every other respect, we want them to act like small pieces of urban space, more like a piece of park than a boat. And we want them to remain totally open and free to use however you like, without any sort of restrictions or guidelines, just like a small park or an urban space.
That's cool. So maybe the death metal band can go and record without asking for permission, right?
They could, yeah. I guess so. I mean, I think a death metal band would probably need permission to film in a park as well. So, but yeah, I'd be happy with that if they wanted to do that. That would be fine by me.
That's so cool. So do they also have to have a flag?
No, no flags.
No? Okay, no flags. And what safety regulations they have to follow that come from the shipping industry or from their ship category?
As I mentioned, we need to have lights, which is proving to be quite a challenge because we don't want to have batteries. But we have small solar-powered lights which have individual small batteries, which are going to be built into the next islands. Then there's also safety ladders and life buoys and that sort of thing.
And in terms of the light, the light color, did you have to follow any specific guidelines or did you have to choose a specific color to not affect the marine life, let's say red or orange light that the fish can't see, or white, yellow, traditional lights?
Just traditional lights. It's just about being visible to boats in foggy conditions or in the dark.
Okay.
Yeah, so just small white lights which are built into the structure in a sort of discrete way, which should also look really impressive at night or at dusk.
Yeah, I can imagine. That must be so beautiful. Really. Oh.
Yeah, and we've had to sort of work in this grey space between traditional buildings and sort of nautical architecture and engineering on a few different projects as well. So we're working on some larger projects in Denmark and also in England and Italy now, and we're having the same situation. We're coming across that more and more, that there are very few rules specifically for building in this grey zone between land and water. So that can be good in some ways. It can give you a bit more flexibility, but it can also be difficult to navigate occasionally.
To navigate, yeah. Yeah, usually it's convenient when you have to deal just with a single authority that gives you the permits. That way you can present the technical documentation, and then if it fulfills certain minimum safety requirements, for example, then you get approved. But in cases, I'm sure you've had to think about this too, in cases where it's not just one single authority giving the permit, but multiple, and when then you have to, and when there's very old and almost bureaucratic established processes, then that's when you cannot really innovate. So I'm really glad that you have on board, you have the municipality on board, because then they can take the flag with you of this innovation.
Yeah, for the Copenhagen Island project, that's the case, and that's been very helpful because they've been pushing the project now. On other projects, it's not. We're definitely feeling that. So in London, for example, we're working on a passenger pier and a public space which is on the River Thames, connected to Fulham Football Club. So that was partly inspired by our work on Copenhagen Islands, and it's a large 3,000 square meter public space, sort of hovering partly on the river, also with green space integrated into it.
Nice.
And that's definitely been a challenge working with the various authorities. I think we're dealing with 7 different authorities, all with different interests. And yeah, that's a good example of some of the difficulties of working in this zone.
Wow. So I don't want to get too old. I do want to get very detailed, but I won't. But just a question to satisfy my own curiosity. So in this project in London with these seven authorities, is it an RFP that you are applying to, or it's directly with them? So do you have leeway to innovate basically in terms of the regulatory aspect that would apply to the project?
So it's a project with a private client, in this case, Fulham Football Club. Um,
Oh,
and
you're fine.
international architecture competition, which we entered and won. But that was only the beginning of the sort of process of getting approval, which we're still going through a year later. But it's looking promising at this stage.
Nice.
Yeah, so a very, very complicated project, that one.
I understand. And in Milan, what are you doing in Milan?
So again, we're only in sort of sketch design phase for this project, but we've been invited to design a new type of space on the outskirts of Milan. Milan is a city without a waterfront, obviously. It's an inland city, but it has these old quarries, which used to be used for making concrete. They used to dig sand up and make concrete there. And now they've been abandoned. So our job is to sort of reimagine how this quarry can be used, including creating sort of waterside buildings and some floating buildings. I can't share too much about that yet, but it's going to be a really exciting project. And it's a
Sounds
nice excuse to escape Denmark every few weeks and go to Italy for a site visit.
Okay, so maybe you are going to continue to fulfill your informal goal of escaping winters as much as you can every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Marshall, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited about I want to see the project that will come after the Copenhagen floating islands. I can't wait to see the ones in the Caribbean because, yeah, there's so much water. Some of them have water, I assume, already there. So the water spaces are there. In many
Exactly.
cases, they are not being utilized. So, yeah, why not doing something that
We're
becomes a living
actually,
space?
yeah, we can see that there's a really big opportunity at the moment to reimagine how we use our harbors. We started in Copenhagen, where this is sort of maybe more advanced than in other places. The water has been cleaned to a level where you can, swim and even farm oysters in the city center. And this is starting to happen in more and more cities. And that really opens up new types of things that you can do with the harbor. The original purposes, like as sort of a network of transportation and industry, is slowly disappearing, and we can sort of reinsert some sort of exciting and interesting new ways of using the harbor. So we're trying to do that in lots of places right now, and we're also working on a sort of a prefabricated system for building on water. Since we've seen in a lot of these projects we're working on, there's not a very good solution, especially when it comes to sustainability for building on water. You usually rely on floating concrete pontoons, which have got a lot of problems, including transportation and sustainability, or steel, which is also problematic. So we're working with some companies to design a prefabricated solution for building almost anything on water. So that's what we're focusing on at the moment as well, and we think that can lead to a lot of really interesting projects on the line.
Absolutely. Yeah, because then you would have the sustainability with the faster speed for production.
Exactly.
What materials are you looking at?
Reinforced recycled polymer.
Okay.
It's a type of plastic. The same reason why plastic is such a bad pollutant in our seas and rivers makes it ideal for using in the water. It doesn't break down and it doesn't require maintenance like steel does. And it's also lightweight, which is obviously critical. So we're separating the structure from the flotation in this case, and creating foldable pontoons, which can be transported easily, and then have flotation added at a later point.
Oh, cool. So when you say foldable, you mean foldable?
Well, they can be taken into pieces and transported quite easily, and then assembled on site as a foundation for all types of structures. So that's what I mean by foldable.
Cool. Oh, awesome. Well, that makes me even more excited because you are one of the firms that right now are pushing the boundaries of what is possible. So congrats for that. And I hope you can continue to do it for many more years. So
thanks so much.
No, Marshall, thanks to you for being here talking to me. I really appreciate your time, and we're gonna put all your social media and your website and all the links there for our listeners and, well, watchers, viewers, to click on them. So thanks a lot for being here talking to me.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.